Hello everybody, my name is Jeremy.
And I'm Jake.
And we just got back from watching Crimson Peak at the theaters. And so we wanted to do a little review for you guys. This at some point will contain spoilers. We will let you know when that happens. So if you would like to see it yourself, you can skip beyond that. But we will do our best to not do that until near the end.
Crimson Peak is a new film by Guillermo del Toro. It is billed as a Gothic romance with ghosts in it. It is not billed as a ghost story per se. It's not billed as a horror movie or horror story, but a Gothic romance with supernatural elements, I guess would be a...
Which is funny because it's kind of what Edith's book kind of turned out in the movie. Walking into it, I had all these really high expectations for it because several years ago, Guillermo del Toro was supposed to direct the Haunted Mansion movie, and it was this big giant thing, and then all of a sudden it just dropped off the face of the earth and nobody ever heard about it again. So in my head, and what I just kept telling myself the whole time, is that this was the movie that he was gonna make, and maybe Disney just didn't greenlight it, and he was like, well, I'm gonna make it anyways, and I'm just gonna call it something else.
I wasn't looking at it through that perspective. I was just kind of walking into this as kind of like, I think that Crimson Peak draws from, as I was saying before we started filming, it draws from a lot of very classic haunted house type stories like The Innocents, The Uninvited, Rebecca, all those sort of kind of creepy stories that aren't necessarily horror stories per se, but are, you know, framed within the confines of a mansion and strike fear into one's heart and a feeling of suspense.
So kind of the whole plot of the movie is we have this character, her name is Edith, and she has been seeing ghosts her whole life. Her first encounters was with her mother who died of black cholera, right? That's
yes,
what she said?
Which I've never heard of before.
I've never heard of before. So she saw this ghost of her mother, and her mother said, beware of Crimson Peak. And then it flashes forward 15 years, and 14 years, and Edith is now writing ghost stories. It's a story that has ghosts in it, much like the movie itself.
It's a parallel, you see.
And she is kind of seduced by this seeming
handsome, brooding baronet from Britain.
And they end up wed together, and she goes to his mansion and discovers that things are not quite so perfect. Prior
to the marriage, we're also introduced to Thomas, the brooding baronet's, let's just say severe sister Lucille, who seems to have a bit of a darkness to her as well.
And a stick up her butt.
Well,
there's kind of an unsettling feeling the moment that she meets Thomas, and it's this kind of weird, like, what's going on here? But he's somehow strangely charming. But Lucille is just wretched right from the beginning. There's absolutely nothing that you like about her.
I liked her hair.
I mean,
her costume.
I think she was fierce as a villain, which she definitely is the villain if you were to label them.
It's cool because it's a very interesting twist. Because the women are the main players of the story, and
which I live for.
And the men are really the damsels in distress.
They're the side characters.
They're the side characters. They're the damsels in distress. They're the ones that need to be saved, and it's the women who really drive the plot. A
lot of people were concerned that it might not be scary, and a lot of the reviews post the movie said that it wasn't scary enough. But the thing with Guillermo del Toro movies is that he creates visually stunning movies, and there are elements of horror and elements of suspense and fear, but nothing that's really gonna like make you scream from the beginning to the end, you know? That's just not his style.
Something that makes you feel unsettled. I don't think there was ever really a moment in the movie where you felt like you could just relax and just take a breather, and I think that's almost more effective than, you know, the horror style, which is everything's fine, then you're scared. I think Del Toro aims for more of just this feeling of uneasiness that's kind of gets under your skin as the story progresses, which I think is kind of cool because I think that's the feeling that the Atterdale house, the mansion, has on Edith is just this general feeling of unrest, of uneasiness that slowly eats away at her and drives the plot forward. So I think he succeeded very well in that.
It's a very beautiful way of psychological horror.
Yeah.
And it's kind of mirrored with this weird dissonance that everything is just so pretty.
No, it wasn't scary, really. I mean, there were a couple moments where I kind of had a little, like, but not like, not like, you know, I wasn't, you know those trailers for, like, Paranormal Activity where it shows the audience and they're like, and then the whole audience just screams. It was not that.
There was a lot of moments that people looked very uncomfortable, like, ooh, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this, but I think it was because that same feeling, like, it was so beautiful and disgusting at the same time that you don't know how to feel about it, so you're just left, like, unsettled and uneasy, like you might shit your pants. Right,
and there was definitely that signature Del Toro body horror side of it. I don't even know if it's body horror so much as it's just that graphicness that I think kind of defines
him as a director.
Him as his director, him as his visual style of just, you know, the way the ghosts were designed, the way
that they move.
The way they move, the, you know, the deaths that do happen in the film, the way they were done. Like, he doesn't shy away from showing you something that makes you uneasy and uncomfortable. So what I really liked, first and foremost, were the practical effects. I love a good practical effect in a movie when it's done well. There's just something really visceral about it. Even if you can almost tell that it's a prosthetic or it's a mannequin, like, there's just something so much more visually arresting about it because it's real and it inhabits a real space. So I really like the practical effects. I loved the visuals of this movie, where the architecture of the house was just stunning with these kind of tall, spindly things and just very odd choices on the inside. And it was beautiful, but then it's just completely subverted by the fact that, like, the walls are literally, like, rotting away and decomposing, and this liquid red clay is just constantly oozing out of the walls. It's coming out of the pipes. Like, in the background of almost every shot, there's this very organic, like, red clay just flowing out of the walls, and it makes it almost feel like the house is, like, alive and it's bleeding, and it's,
I thought that was really pretty. And I loved, throughout the whole movie, it would show, like, the staircase, and there was a big hole in the roof, and there were always, like, leaves or snow coming down, and it reminded me of, like, scenes in, like, BioShock, where you just walk through and there's just, like, water dripping, and there's something so, like, this isn't supposed to happen, but it's so pretty at the same time. Like, it very much reminded me of that, and it was that, like, unsettling, beautiful thing.
Right.
Where it's like there's this constant, like, falling of leaves in the middle of the house that shouldn't be happening, and everybody should be disturbed by the fact that this is happening.
Right.
But nobody seemed to bat an eyelash at it.
Yeah, like, they mention, like, the roof has caved in, the floorboards are rotting away, and the house is sinking. The house is sinking literally into the peak of the mountain.
And the water runs red when you turn it on.
But they just accept it.
It's just there.
That's just how it is, and they just live in the house. Like, they're literally walking through and there's just red clay oozing out of the wall behind them, and nobody talks about it. They don't notice it. Like, that was the thing that unsettled me the most was Edith's character mentioned, you know, she doesn't even mention it. Like, Thomas mentions the hole in the roof and the rotting floorboards, but she's just kind of like, oh, okay. And then she doesn't even mention, like, the clay coming out of the walls, and something about that is just so, like, unsettling and how complacent it is, because it's not right. Like, you would be like, I can't live here. Like, this is literally like I'm living outside.
I'm in a slum.
It's disgusting.
She did mention that it was colder inside the house than it was outside. And that was the most that she mentioned.
The most she complained.
And
or like the fact that the attic is just covered in the black moths.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just doesn't get noticed. It's not mentioned. The fact that there were all the dead flies when she went to take off her hat.
She looked at them and was kind of disturbed by them, but didn't really.
But she didn't
talk about it.
Yeah.
And without getting into spoilers, because we'll talk about that at the very end. I almost feel like it was because Thomas and Lucille were so far gone at that point that they just don't even notice the horrors happening in their own house, whereas, you know, Edith is very in tune with spirituality and the spirits, and, you know, she sees things that they don't, but because they don't acknowledge it, she kind of just doesn't really acknowledge it either.
I think the costumes were probably my very favorite part, and I think even the costumes played into the whole like visual dissonance because the costumes were beautiful. They were just fantasies of costumes. There was nothing practical about them. They hit all the right notes for a Victorian drama, but with none of the, I guess, editing. I love costumes. If you do a costume right, I will rant and rave about it in the best way possible about how well it was done.
I like Tom Hiddleston's butt.
Tom Hiddleston's butt and his body were very nice too.
But his ass.
I didn't like the execution of the computer-generated visuals. They just look too fake to me. But that's a problem with mainstream CGI effects in general, not necessarily just in regards to this movie. There were a couple nitpicky things I didn't like, but other than that, overall I really liked the movie.
I don't think there was anything I disliked.
I would give it a solid A-. I thought it was very beautiful. I thought it was very arresting, and I think it succeeded very well at what it was trying to do. I'm just gonna dock it a little bit on the grading scale because as beautifully executed as it was, when you really start getting into like the story elements of it, it was not the most original story.
It wasn't. I will agree with that it's not the most original storyline, and I think compared to everything else, I think the CGI just knocked it down just a little bit.
That too.
I didn't dislike the CGI, but it also wasn't as crisp and clean as the rest of the movie was. So I would agree, I think an A- would be a suiting review. So before we get into any spoilers, I just want to say that throughout the whole movie, I just kept pointing at little things that I think were nods to the Haunted Mansion in some way, and maybe I'm just stretching, but there were so many points where I was like, this is that character in the ride, like the guy at the beginning that literally only showed up for just a little tiny bit of time. There was this old guy that comes up and meets them and is like, oh, you've been married for a long time. And he looked like the guy in the graveyard scene in the Haunted Mansion. And that's when the dog came running up right then and there, and the old man in the graveyard has this little, like, dilapidated dog. And there were just little things that were inside the manor that reminded me of the Haunted Mansion. There was a bust in the background in one of the shots, and it looked like those busts in the main parlor area when you're walking in that look at you no matter where you're walking in. It looked just like that bust but it didn't like follow you around. And then the mother, whose painting was on the wall, looked a lot like the old lady that's in the elevator that's sitting on top of the grave. And then just the piano scene reminded me of the ballroom. And then there was the dance at near the beginning where they had their first waltz together. That reminded me of the waltz scene in the Haunted Mansion. And the fact that they chose a waltz and like that's like the same dance that they do in the Haunted Mansion. It was just, there were all these little tiny echoes from the ride that I feel so strongly that this is what Guillermo del Toro was going to create, and I think Disney just didn't greenlight it, and I think he was just like, okay, well, I'm going to create a movie that has a different name, and I'm going to use this dark story that I really wanted to write. And I think there was one scene where Edith is walking down the hallway and with a candelabra and a 3-pronged candelabra, and then the door starts rattling and she goes to pull it open and it slams shut, and there's a whole hallway in the Haunted Mansion of doors that are opening and closing on themselves. There was one scene that reminded me of The Bride in the Attic, and there were just a lot of little tiny hints that I feel like it's where he was gonna go with it, but it just didn't happen. So that's just 2 cents put in the pot.
So now, at this point, we're gonna spoil everything. We're gonna talk about all the plot twists. So if you do not want any of that to get ruined, you need to turn off the video.
Go watch the movie.
Go watch the movie.
And then come back.
Then come back and watch this part. But do not continue if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled. There's exactly one usage of the word fuck in this movie.
There was. I was surprised about that.
Precisely one usage of the word fuck in a very jarring way. I will not tell you exactly where, but let me tell you. It was the best usage of fuck in a movie I have seen in a long time.
It was.
Just...
It was beautiful. The twists and turns in this movie, I will admit I was not completely expecting. There were a lot of hints towards it, and it was building towards them, and basically what it all culminates to is that Lucille and Thomas have been romantically involved for their whole life because they only knew each other. They were only ever allowed to interact with each other. The only love that they knew, which was explained by Lucille, was given by each other, and
that evolved into a romantic relationship,
sexual,
that evolved into a sexual relationship, and that's where the kind of the Gothic romance aspect of it all plays in, because, you know, it's not just that Edith loves Thomas, it's that Thomas and Lucille love each other as well. And as Lucille puts it, you know, that love turned into horror and into what has happened, which is basically that they're kind of like this, you know, black widower couple, or brother and sister, who are finding women who are kind of
well off
and
yes, pantos,
and just kind of, you know, lost and floating in the world without any real direction. He marries them, she kills them, and they
get all the money. And nobody bats an eyelash because they're, you know, hours and hours away from town. They're in this old dilapidated mansion, and there's rumors and conspiracy about the mansion, but nobody really looks into it.
Again, adding to that kind of dissonance of
like, why does nobody care?
Why does nobody question this? And we mentioned that the ghosts look like clay. It's because you find out that the bodies of the wives that have been killed have been dumped in the
clay pits
underneath the house, which is why their bodies look like they're covered in clay.
Yeah. No. Come here.
This is a pamphlet cat. I had a couple theories, and I whispered a couple to Jara as the movie was going about where I thought it could go. I'm gonna be honest, I called the incest thing pretty much I internally called it at the ballroom scene.
I think I mentioned something very early on that I thought that they were not really brother and sister. I thought they may have been like a power couple that was like killing people just for shits and gigs.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a very long time, until it got to the scene where Lucille was feeding oatmeal to Edith and talking about their childhood, up until that point, I thought that they were lying about being brother and sister. And I can't remember what movie has done that before, but there was a movie I watched recently where the couple, the brother and sister are not actually brother and sister, they're actually a couple, and they've been lying about it the whole time, and then it's revealed at the end that they weren't ever related. So up until that point, I knew that they were together, but I didn't know that they were brother and sister. I didn't think that they were going to do incest.
I actually, not to toot my own horn, I actually, when I saw the one trailer that showed the scene of her saying, "You won't ever leave me," when I saw that, I never doubted, because it is Del Toro and he does go for that shock factor, I never doubted that they were actually related, and when I saw that scene in the trailer, I was like, oh, it's going to be that kind of story, is it? Oh, we're going there. But, I mean, like, alright, you know, you did it. You went for it. And then on the flip side of it, I was a little, I don't know, like, not disappointed, but again, that's kind of like, I feel like that plot has been used before. I can't think of what story or what movie. I just know in a similar situation where, you know, it is this incestuous relationship and then somebody else comes into the relationship, which causes problems. I know it's been used before. It's a little bit of the psycho trope. Mm-hmm. Go see it. Go see it.
It was good.
It was a good movie. Go see it. Give it your money. Buy it on Blu-ray. Look at pictures of the costumes online, for God's sake. They're just, God, beautiful.
It was a very stunning movie. And that's been our review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know what you think if you have seen the movie. And if you haven't, go and see it and then come back and tell us what you think. Bye!
Bye!